So good afternoon and welcome to our scoping meeting for proposed amendments to rules 4601, 4603, 4604, 4653, and 4663. I will note that these amendments are specifically to address Clean Air Act contingency measure requirements for both the 2008 and the 2015 8-hour ozone standards. This meeting is being held in person and telecast between our Fresno, Modesto, and Bakersfield offices and via Zoom. My name is Emily Nealand, and I'm the Director of Air Quality Planning, and I'm joined by Tim Franquist, Program Manager out in the audience, Dr. James Steincypher, Senior Air Quality Specialist, and Kyle Matsumura, Air Quality Specialist. We will do our best to facilitate a smooth meeting with public participation in person and via Zoom. Before we begin, here are some important guidelines and general instructions for the meeting. Please silence your other communication devices, such as your cell phone. During the meeting, all public participants on Zoom will be placed on mute by the host. Public members will not be able to mute or unmute manually. If you'd like to provide public comment during the comment period of this workshop, please step up to the podium to signify that you wish to speak or raise your hand on Zoom. Audio for members of the public will be unmuted once they are recognized to make a public comment. You can also submit comments or questions via the Q&A function on Zoom, which will be addressed after any verbal public comments. If you are presenting or providing a public comment, please state your name and affiliation and speak slowly to allow for smooth translation. At this time, our translators will share instructions on how to access the interpretation services.
Muy buenas tardes y bienvenidos a todos. Hoy tendremos interpretación simultánea disponible en español para los que gusten disfrutar de la junta. Si usted está utilizando una computadora, buscar el icono de un mundo que aparece abajo de su pantalla que dirá interpretación. De ahí seleccionará donde dice español y silenciar el audio original. Si usted está utilizando un teléfono o un tableta, su proceso se mirará de un poco diferente. Seleccionarán los 3 puntos en la pantalla que digan More o Más en español. Deslizarán arriba el menú de opciones hacia donde dice Interpretación. De ahí usted seleccionará Español. Una vez más, silenciar el audio original. Y cuando han acabado, quizás habrá un botón que diga Listo, ya no finalizar. O si ha actualizado, solamente tendrá que presionar en otro lugar en la pantalla. Para poder hacer una pregunta o un comentario, por favor, seleccione el icono de reacciones para poder levantar su mano. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. The San Joaquin Valley faces unparalleled challenges in meeting federal air quality standards due to our unique topography and meteorology. The valley is surrounded by mountains to the east, west, and south, and inversion layers trap air pollution close to the ground, particularly during winter months. The valley is also a major goods movement corridor with substantial truck and train traffic and high population growth. Furthermore, the valley faces pollution transported from other areas and emission from wildfires. All of these factors mean that the valley requires substantially greater emissions reductions than other regions in order to meet clean air targets. Today's scoping meeting will focus primarily on measures to further reduce ozone in the valley. Ozone is formed through chemical reactions of nitrogen oxides, or NOx, and volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, in the presence of heat and sunlight. NOx is primarily emitted by combustion from mobile sources, while VOCs may be emitted biogenically from plants or trees, or they may be emitted from consumer products, stationary sources, or mobile sources. The valley has had tremendous success reducing emissions since 1980, as seen on the chart at the right. This has been accomplished through a variety of regulatory actions adopted by the district's governing board, mobile source emissions adopted by CARB, or the California Air Resources Board, as well as strong incentive programs totaling approximately $7.1 billion in public and private investments. This success also highlights the challenges ahead, as the valley still has many standards to attain, and our ability to reduce emissions even further becomes more and more difficult given our limited jurisdiction. Looking at the graph on the right, the light and dark green sections at the bottom are what the district has regulatory authority over. And so even after those drastic reductions, we have to reduce emissions even further using only that small portion of sources. That said, these emission reductions are continuing to yield substantial reductions in ozone levels in the valley. As you can see in the maps at the bottom of this slide, the valley has seen tremendous improvement over the last 2 decades. We've seen significant reductions in days exceeding the 1-hour and 8-hour ozone standards, and the vast majority of days now meet both the 1997 and the 2008 ozone standards. Before we discuss the specific measures at issue today, I'd like to give a brief overview of what prompted the amendments we'll be discussing. In 2019, the EPA approved the district's 2016 ozone plan and conditionally approved the contingency measure requirements in that plan. Contingency measures are provisions that are held in reserve and can be implemented quickly if additional emission reductions are required. In October 2021, EPA withdrew their approval in response to litigation, triggering sanctions clocks. The district's 2022 ozone plan did not include contingency measures due to a lack of guidance from EPA. In March 2023, EPA issued draft guidance for developing approvable contingency measures, and just this week finalized that guidance. The district is actively reviewing this final guidance right now. Based on the draft guidance, the district adopted the ozone contingency measure SIP revision in April of this year, which contained commitments to amend a number of district rules with contingency provisions. The SIP revision was conditionally approved by EPA in October. At this time, I'll turn the mic over to Kyle Matsumura to go into more depth on the rules that the district is proposing to amend today.
Thanks for the introduction, Jim. Here we have an overview of the district's 5 rule commitments made in the ozone contingency SIP revision that we just discussed. We will get further into each of these commitments later in this presentation. The commitment for Rule 4601, architectural coatings, includes removing the small container exemption for rust preventative coatings. The commitment for Rule 4603, surface coating of metal parts and products, plastic parts and products, and pleasure crafts, involves removing the exemption for solvents used for stripping of cured coatings, cured adhesives, and cured inks. Our commitment for Rule 4604, can and coil coating operations, includes lowering the VOC limit for solvents used for cleaning of coating application equipment, specifically sheet coaters for 3-piece cans. Our commitment for Rule 4653, adhesives and sealants, includes lowering the VOC limit for PVC welding adhesives. And our last commitment for Rule 4663, organic solvent cleaning, storage, and disposal, would establish a new VOC limit for organic solvents used for sterilizing food, manufacturing, and processing equipment. Contingency measures are required under the Clean Air Act, and these measures must be triggered to be implemented, and these achieve additional emission reductions if an area were to fail to meet certain Clean Air Act requirements. Under the Clean Air Act, contingency measures are triggered for federal ozone standards if the district were to fail to meet reasonable further progress or fail to attain a federal standard by the applicable attainment date. These measures could be implemented within 60 days of final EPA rulemaking that one of these contingency triggers has occurred. As you can see in this graphic, the district is required to meet reasonable further progress milestones in specific years and also attain each federal standard by the attainment date to avoid triggering these measures. Please note that the 2008 and 2015 8-hour ozone standards have different RFP and attainment years. Rule 4601, or architectural coatings, was first adopted in April of 1991, and we last amended in April of 2020. This rule applies to any person who supplies, markets, sells, offers for sale, applies, or solicits for application of any architectural coating, or manufactures, blends, or repackages any architectural coating for use within the district. The district's contingency measure commitment from the ozone contingency SIP revision was to remove the small container exemption for rust preventative coatings. If this measure were to be triggered, rust preventative coatings sold in containers with less than 1 liter of volume would no longer be exempt, and they would become subject to a 250 gram per liter VOC limit. This new VOC limit would be enforced through a point of sale requirement. Architectural coatings available for sale must meet the VOC limits set by the district in Rule 4601. And we have identified that products that comply with this new limit are already commercially available. Therefore, we do not foresee any product development or reformulation that will be required to comply with this measure. Rule 4603, or surface coating of metal parts and products, plastic parts and products, and pleasure crafts, was also adopted in April of 1991 and last amended in September of 2009. This rule applies to the surface coating of a wide variety of products, including metal parts and products, large appliances parts and products, metal furniture, plastic parts and products, automotive, transportation, and business machine plastic parts and products, and pleasure crafts. This rule also applies to the organic solvent cleaning, storage, and disposal of all solvents and waste solvent materials associated with such coatings. The contingency measure commitment from the district was to remove the exemption for stripping agents. If this measure were to be triggered, these stripping agents would then become subject to a 200 gram per liter VOC limit. The district did not identify any active facilities that are permitted to use stripping agents for metal parts and products, but any new operations would be subject to the new VOC limit. And we have also identified compliant products that are currently available, avoiding product reformulation. We'll move on to Rule 4604, or can and coil coating operations. This rule was first adopted in April of 1991 and last amended in September of 2007. Rule 4604 applies to can and coil coating operations and to organic solvent cleaning, storage, and disposal associated with can and coil coating operations. These operations use a wide variety of equipment that must be cleaned with a solvent to prevent coating buildup and ensure product consistency. The contingency measure commitment from the district includes lowering the VOC limit for organic solvents used for the cleaning of coating application equipment, specifically sheet coaters of 3-piece cans. The proposed limit would lower the VOC limit for these solvents from 250 grams per liter to 25 grams per liter. We have identified a single active permitted facility that would be impacted by this measure. And we have also found compliant products that are publicly available, and we expect to avoid the need for product reformulation again. For Rule 4653, adhesives and sealants, we adopted it originally in March of 1994 and was last amended in September of 2007. Rule 4653 applies to any person who supplies, sells, offers for sale, or applies any adhesive product, sealant product, or associated solvent used within the district. The contingency measure commitment would lower the VOC limit for PVC welding adhesive from 510 grams per liter to 500 grams per liter. If this measure were to be triggered, PVC welding adhesives would then become subject to the 500 gram per liter VOC limit. The district has identified 15 facilities that have an active permit that includes this current limit for PVC welding adhesives. And we have identified compliant products, again, avoiding the need for product development. All right, moving on to our last rule commitment in Rule 4663, organic solvent cleaning, storage, and disposal. This rule was originally adopted in December of 2001 and last amended in September of 2007. This rule applies to any organic solvent cleaning performed outside of a degreaser during production, repair, maintenance, servicing of parts, products, tools, machinery, or equipment, or in a general work areas at a stationary source. This rule also applies to the storage and disposal of all solvents and waste solvent materials at a stationary source. Rule 4663 does not currently have a VOC limit set for organic solvents used for sterilizing food manufacturing or processing equipment. If triggered, this measure would establish a new 200 gram per liter VOC limit for these solvents. And the district is currently analyzing food and manufacturing facilities that could be impacted by this new VOC limit. However, we have identified compliant products that are publicly available. Again, we do not expect any needs for product reformulation or development. So that wraps up the discussion of our rule commitments. And here you can see our public process. We are currently holding the scoping meeting. And in the future, we plan to hold public workshops. This will be followed by a 30-day publication of rule language prior to the governing board hearing. Once these rule amendments are approved, we will submit them to to EPA through CARB. And most importantly, we encourage public participation throughout this entire process. If you have any comments, concerns, please feel free to reach out to us. And here I will provide my contact information in case you would like to submit any written comments. And I believe now we will start taking public comments.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And apologies again, everyone, for the audio issues that we encountered in the beginning. So with that, we will open up for any questions or comments. You are welcome to raise your hand on Zoom, but we will first take any comments in person. Are there any public commenters in person? Okay, seeing none. Any commenters on Zoom, please raise your hand if you'd like to speak. And I will note, this is a very preliminary scoping meeting to just kick off this public process. We will be sharing more information into the future, and so there will be ongoing opportunities to engage. Okay, I'm not seeing any indication of any commenters on Zoom. I will double check the Q&A. For all permitted sources that are affected, will the district reach out is a question that was placed in the Q&A. Typically, when we have a rule be implemented or amended, we will send out a compliance assistance bulletin via our email listserv to notify facilities that they are required to comply by a specific date. In this specific scenario with the contingency measure, I would anticipate that if it is triggered, then we would send out some sort of compliance assistance bulletin, but I will definitely note down your comment or question to ensure that we take that into consideration once these measures are adopted, if they are implemented, to ensure that we notify our affected facilities. I'm not seeing any additional questions on the Q&A. So with that, we will go ahead and conclude the workshop, and just want to again appreciate everybody for your attendance and looking forward to the ongoing public engagement through this process. Thank you.